Ask not what we all be can do for you. Ask what you can do for we all be.
We all be on to have on Dr. Gerald Horne, the one and only, a true visionary when we come to history, telling our story. How you doing today, sir?
Fine, thank you.
I just want to ask you about your premise about the Revolutionary War and why it was really fought. Can you just get into that a little bit for us?
Well, you're asking me about my new book, Counter-Revolution of 1776, Slave Resistance and the Origins of the United States of America. The short answer is that the revolt against British rule that led to the formation of the United States of America was prompted in no small part by the desire of the slave owners to escape abolitionism, that is to say the abolition of slavery, which was growing like wildfire in Britain, the home country. You may know about June 1772, Somerset's case, which seemed to suggest that slavery, which was abolished in England in that particular case, would then be crossing the Atlantic and be abolished in the empire, which would have jeopardized major fortunes. Rather than see that happen, the slave owners, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, James Madison, et al., rebelled against British rule. And this thesis also helps to suggest why the people of African descent have been treated so horribly since 1776 in North America, because we had enough good sense to recognize that this revolt against British rule was not in our best interest, and therefore we mostly sided with the Redcoats, with the British, against these traitors to London, if you like. But the longer story goes back to 1688 and the so-called Glorious Revolution in England. That is to say, the rising merchant class revolted against the crown, against the monarchy, and fundamentally won. What this led to with regard to African people was that the Royal African Company, which theretofore had been under the thumb of the king, that trade was opened up. There was free trade in Africans, so to speak. And the merchants entered this lucrative trade in mass and descended upon Africa with the diminished energy of crazed bees, manacling and handcuffing every African in sight, not least because this trade was so profitable. Or there were some slave voyages where you could garner a profit of 1,700%. And as you may know, even today in 2014, there are those who will sell their firstborn child for a 1,700% profit, let alone some African they didn't know. And so they began driving Africans across the Atlantic, handcuffed and manacled in stupendous numbers. This had two consequences. Number one, it created great wealth and profit for some. It led to the takeoff of the system we now know as capitalism. But number two, it led to instability, because most of these Africans were being driven to the Caribbean. Up until 1750, London saw the Caribbean as being more profitable than the North American mainland. You may know that after Britain defeated France in the 7 Years' War, 1763, basically, France decided to keep Guadeloupe and give up their interest in Canada, Quebec. Even though, of course, today that sounds a little strange. But given the fact that slavery was so profitable, it's not strange. In any case, with the slave revolts that are taking place in the Caribbean, efforts by the Africans to liquidate the settler class, you have many of the settlers deciding to move en masse, making the great trek to the North American mainland. on the one hand, this didn't save them. For example, 1739, you have Stonewall's Revolt in South Carolina, where the Africans, who are disproportionately have Angolan roots, seek to liquidate the planter class and the settler class in South Carolina, and are partially successful, although they're eventually captured and murdered. But it's interesting that these Africans, who, as noted, were mostly Angolan, were seeking to march to Spanish Florida. Florida was controlled by the Spanish up until about 1821. And they were going to ally with the Spanish against the British, because it's interesting that the Africans, our ancestors, they were very nimble diplomatic. That is to say, first they were trying to ally with the Spanish against the British. And then when the settlers revolted, they allied with the British against the settlers. And then after the settlers triumphed, forming the United States of America, then they went back to allying with the British. You know, more nimble than we are today, because most people today, they
read my mind on that.
Yeah, they don't have a clue about what's going on outside of North America, let alone making diplomatic alliances. In any case, with the challenge to British colonialism in North America, particularly by the Spanish, who, by the way, had begun to arm Africans as early as the 1500s for reasons we need not get into. This was putting competitive pressure on the British to do the same. But this was outraging the settlers, because they felt that you should not arm Africans. You should manacle and handcuff every African in sight and march them into the tobacco fields and march them into the cotton fields, you know, to create wealth for themselves. So this was creating a rift and a fissure between the settlers and London. And as noted, all of this explodes in the 1770s with Somerset's case, June 1772, and then July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence for this nation now known as the United States of America.
Let me ask you this, can black people get justice in the system as set up the way a system is set?
Well, yes and no. I mean, ultimately, no. But in the short term, yes, in the sense that if we do what our ancestors did, forge diplomatic alliances, rely upon global pressure, because I've argued in a number of books that it's global pressure that has brought us to this point today. It's global pressure that explains why we're sitting in the Peabody Hotel, where, as a few decades ago, you know, they would have chased us out of here with a stick. You know, at best, if we were lucky. So it depends.
Well, actually, this because you said global pressure. Now I was thinking about I had covered Ferguson. I went up there in the Mike Brown situation.
Sure.
So I mean, it was because of global pressure that the United States really responded.
Absolutely. RT. I'm on RT all the time. I was just on there on this is Mundo.
Okay. Wow.
You know, from Moscow. But you know, if you look at the coverage of Ferguson, RT was better than CNN, MSNBC, and you know, the Iranians covered it. China Daily covered it. And that's really what prompted the pressure. Because if you look at the polls, the majority of Euro-Americans don't even see what the big deal is with regard to Ferguson. What are these Negroes complaining about? And even if you look at those who you would think would be our allies, such as the AFL-CIO and their leader, Rich Trumka, he gave the speech in St. Louis a few days ago that was terrible. You know, embracing Darren Wilson as our brothers, you know.
He said that in a speech in St. Louis, ground zero. Wow.
Yeah, and this is supposed to be our, you know, you have more black people pay dues to the AFL-CIO than the civil rights organizations, any other organizations that include black people. And yet, this guy has the nerve, you know, to go to St. Louis, and he thinks he's making a great speech. That's what's so incredible about it.
Did he understand, like, what happened to East St. Louis in 1917? I don't think. Do you understand why unions were formed to keep a black skilled labor force from getting jobs and competing with their white counterparts?
And these people are ignorant in this country. You know that.
I just try to be like. So, I mean, like, do you think that the Ferguson really could be the start of a revolution?
Well, I don't know, man. You know, it's. I would like to think so.
Right.
But I just don't see. I don't see the consciousness. The global consciousness in particular. I don't think that black people realize that we have all these allies abroad. We don't have that as many allies in North America.
Right.
And that hasn't dawned for various reasons. And, my books have helped explain why that is the case. But it hasn't dawned.
I mean, who been really responding to your book, like on the street and stuff? Who you get the most response from?
Well, it depends on the book. Okay. I mean, the 1776 books has gotten a great response from the black community. My book, I wrote a book on the Mexican Revolution. I got a great response from the Mexican team. And so, it depends on the book. My book on Cuba got a great response from the Cubans. From top to bottom.
So you tell it from like the ground up, like you tell people's history, of history versus like, the great conqueror.
Sure.
So it's difficult, like, for people to take in the 1776, the fact that, a war wasn't fought to, like even the Civil War.
Hey man, it's like telling people there's no such thing as Santa Claus. Yeah, people, but come on, the people in this country are ignorant. They don't know anything about 2013, let alone 1776.
So is it frustrating to be this messenger of what really happened, what really transpired?
Not really. I mean, I consider myself to be lucky not to be indicted of murder, given what I'm saying. So no, I don't feel frustrated. I feel lucky, given how this country deals with people with dissident points of view.
So what do you tell people that want to know the truth, they want to do something based on that truth or the facts?
Well, study, of course. Organizationally, I think that all of our organizations and those who purport to speak for us should be making global alliances, with the Chinese, the Russians, the Brazilians, the Indians, the South Africans, the CARICOM, Caribbean community headquartered in Georgetown, Guyana. I mean, that's where it's at.
All right. So how can we find out more information about you and your books? Like, what do people need to do?
I'm not underground, at least not yet. I'm all over the internet, YouTube, whatever.
You do got tenure, right?
Oh, sure.
That's good. That's a good thing. That's good. Well, Dr. Gerald Horne, I want to thank you so much for taking time out your busy schedule to bless us with your information and insight. The words of Breakthrough Gallatin, we love you madly. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, sir.